without a whole lot of information about what you do, and then get into your McKeesport memory. And we're good.
Go ahead, Rita.
Well, I'm Rita Zolten Berman, born and raised in McKeesport, Pennsylvania, lived there for 20 years, and many other places in between, and now live in Manhattan.
And I'm Bob Zolten, Robert Allen Zolten, and also grew up in McKeesport, left there when I went to college, basically came back for a year or two when I lived in medical school, and I actually commuted to Pittsburgh. But after that, pretty much gone. It brings back great memories to be here with all of these people and observe where everyone has gone with their lives. I think McKeesport, growing up in McKeesport, had a lot to do with the success of this group. I remember specifically in McKeesport how comfortable I felt. I don't remember there ever being prejudice in McKeesport against Jews or any other minority group. I remember never having fear or thoughts of being treated as a second-class citizen. And I give credit to the people of McKeesport for that.
Well, I agree with you. We lived north of the Mason-Dixon line, but there was no racial prejudice that I recall. I never recalled anti-Semitism at all growing up either.
No, I don't either. It was terrific. And there was a great community of Jewish people who enjoyed being with each other. I appreciated having my sister there because I dated all her friends.
And vice versa. It works both ways. It's nice having
good.
an older brother.
Yeah. The other thing that comes to mind is when the Tree of Life Synagogue was built, I was to be the first bar mitzvah there. And that was a very exciting thing for me, and especially for my family.
You were actually very religious in those days.
I was very religious.
They wanted you to become a rabbi. You were so into it.
Yeah, but what kind of a job is that for a Jewish boy? So,
Bada bing, bada boom.
yeah, I didn't do that. But Leon Gutman, who was a little bit older than I, and who went off to a yeshiva, I think in Baltimore, came back and had his bar mitzvah at the Tree of Life Synagogue before me. Now, that wasn't fair.
We're talking 60 years ago, and it still bothers us.
That's right. It is. It's 60 years.
Things that I remember most about growing up was the fact that our father was one of 9 children, 8 of whom were very close in the McKeesport area. So we grew up with all our aunts, uncles, and first cousins. Holidays were a family get-together, picnics in Renzi Park. Family was very important. Our grandfather lived next door to us for many years while he was still alive. And he was a little old Jewish man with a yarmulke on. So we always grew up with religion and aunts and uncles and family around us. And I think a lot of our friends did the same thing in McKeesport. A lot of our friends had parents who married each other. You know, aunts married brothers of some other family whose sister married it back into that family. So it was a very close Jewish community with lots of intermarriages. And they all kept tabs on one another. We couldn't go anywhere without at least some aunt or uncle or some other parent watching over all of us. So we were raised by a community. When they say it takes a village, McKeesport was that village.
Yeah, it wasn't so much the fact of the religious part of being Jewish. It was the cultural part. And I think that meant a lot to us. It meant a lot to me. I'm trying to actually pass that on to my children now at a much later time and have them know what it means to be a member of the Jewish community.
Well, I think it was also unique to our time, too. The 50s was very unique. It was, still very low-key and normal. And religion was an everyday part of our lives. And being in a small town, which can't get much smaller than McKeesport, that was the central focus for the Jewish families, religion and family.
I'm going to take a quick...
Sure.
Boom.
Okay, we used to have family seders. The Zolten family seders were typical family seders. The adults were at one end of the table, and the kids usually were, by the time they got to us, because we were such a big family, we were out the door in the next hallway, and the kids were at the end of the table. And our grandfather sat at the head of the table and didn't miss a word in the seder. Every single Hebrew, and it was all in Hebrew because that's all he spoke. And we would be at the end, and we would be rolling our eyes and giggling, and it was interminable. But one memorable Seder was Uncle Sam Katz, who was a real character. At the end of the Seder, after the meal, I should say, before the end of the Seder, after the meal, he got up and he looked at his brothers-in-law and he said, including my father,
All together now.
"Tweedledee, follow me." And they went downstairs into the lower level of the family where our grandfather lived and played cards.
Before the Seder was over.
Before you came back upstairs to finish the Seder. So when the Seder commenced, there were no men there. They were all downstairs, and left was my grandfather, his daughters and daughters-in-law, and all the kids way at the other end of the table.
Ah, but the food. Wow, it was wonderful. And we got to taste wine.
Yes.
We did get to taste wine.
Yes, we
It
always
was
had
terrific.
wine.
We there's a famous, pardon me, famous Zolten story. My dad and with his brother Bam, and for a while his other brother Howard Heshe had a store in downtown McKeesport. It's a very well-known store because it was right by the main Jenny Lind bus stop, and so everybody knew it. Everybody came in, and everybody loved the Zolten guys because they were so friendly and generous. Whatever you needed, they were there for it. Somehow in 1946, the Zolten brothers got a hold of a huge quantity of jelly beans. Do you remember the jelly bean story?
I was very young, but I've heard of the story since. It's
You were 4, so you were very young.
or 5, yeah.
Yeah,
We still
yeah,
lived on
you were
Bailey.
5, right.
We lived on Bailey Avenue.
And in those days, there was rationing after the war, and jelly beans were made with sugar, which was not permitted to be sold in certain circumstances. They got a hold of this huge quantity of jelly beans and were selling them at a price that was not legal. And I think that my dad and my Uncle Bam were arrested for this, and it was in the papers. They became the Jelly Bean Kings. It was really, really quite
scandal.
something. I don't know how it ended up, actually. They never certainly went to jail. I don't think it even went to court. Somehow it was dismissed. But, yeah, my dad was the Jelly Bean King.
I don't remember any of this until I was much older, except when we started talking about the Jelly Bean incident, this came to my memory. I was 5 years old, or 4 years old, 4.5, going to the bathroom, and the toilet paper ran out. So I'm taking off the roll to put a new roll of toilet paper in, and I'm taking the cardboard tube out, and there's a piece of paper inside, which I take out, and it turns out it's an article from the newspaper, the Daily News in McKeesport, that talked about the Jelly Bean incident. And to me, it meant nothing. First of all, I probably couldn't read very many of the words, and I just thought it was bizarre that it should be stuffed in the toilet paper roll. Well, thinking about it afterwards, it must have been my father reading the newspaper in the bathroom, probably did not want my mother to see this article. He tears it out of the newspaper, stuffs it in the, did you not?
I've never heard this.
Stuffs it in the toilet paper roll and goes about, the rest of the day. I'm in there, I guess, an hour or two later, and there it was. And I don't know whatever happened to it, what it said, or anything, but it was about the Jelly Bean incident.
That's funny.